They spoke only to each other, at school, in front of their parents, even in front of doctors. The two girls barely spoke at all, but they were never truly silent. When they were alone, they talked, too fast, too quietly, and in a way nobody else could understand. At first, people thought it was normal. They were twins. Maybe this was just what twins did. But as time passed, people began to realize something unsettling. This was not just a strange childhood habit. The two girls were drifting away from the world and becoming trapped inside each other. People said they moved at the exact same moment. They ate at the same pace. Some even claimed they tried to go to the bathroom at the same time, as if an invisible thread connected them. The sisters stayed silent together. They wrote stories together, committed crimes together, and were eventually locked away together. Then one day, they began saying something disturbing. One of us has to die. And somehow, it sounded less like fear, and more like a decision. Then it actually happened. One of them died. And afterward, the surviving sister suddenly began speaking to the world again. Why did one sister seem to come back to life only after the other one died? Tonight's story is the case of the silent twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons. (1963). Twin sisters were born. Their names were June Gibbons and Jennifer Gibbons. The two girls looked almost identical, the same face, similar eyes, nearly identical movements. People who saw them often said it felt like one person had somehow split into two. The sisters were always together. Everywhere they went, they stayed side by side. And when they were separated, they became anxious. At first, it looked like the normal bond between twins. But over time, something about them began to feel unusual. The girls rarely spoke to other people. When someone talked to them, they stayed silent. Teachers asked questions. Classmates tried to speak to them. Adults approached them. But the girls would simply stare quietly at each other. Yet when they were alone, everything changed. They whispered to one another in tiny voices, so quickly that almost nobody could understand them. It sounded like a secret code, their own language, their own rhythm, their own world. Their parents became worried. Teachers became worried too. But nobody could fully understand what was happening. Were the girls unable to speak? Had they chosen not to speak? Or had they simply stopped feeling the need to speak to the outside world? Slowly, June and Jennifer disappeared into a private world that belonged only to them. And over time, their bond became something heavier than love. For the twins, school never felt safe. There were unfamiliar eyes watching them, cold words whispered behind their backs, and people who did not understand them. June and Jennifer grew up in Wales, in the United Kingdom. At school, the sisters stood out immediately. Their appearance, their accents, the way they clung only to each other. Everything about them made them targets for bullying. At first, it was small things, whispers, mocking, children imitating the way they behaved, people calling them strange. But to the twins, those small moments may have slowly started to feel like the entire world rejecting them. The sisters spoke less and less. First, they withdrew from classmates, then from teachers, and eventually, even from their own family. When people approached them, they froze. They lowered their heads, avoided eye contact. But whenever they looked at each other, their private world seemed to come alive again. Only inside that world did they feel safe. Only there could they truly speak. The problem was, that world kept growing larger, and the real world kept becoming smaller. Even when the girls were surrounded by people, they seemed completely isolated. They sat inside classrooms, yet somehow looked absent. Physically, they were still part of society, but emotionally, they were locked inside a room that only the two of them could enter. And as the years passed, that room seemed to close tighter and tighter around them. Eventually, nobody could tell anymore whether the world had pushed the twins away or whether the twins had pushed the world away first. As time passed, June and Jennifer became more alike, not only in the way they spoke, but in the way they moved. Their expressions matched, their posture matched. Even their walking patterns seemed synchronized. Some people claimed the twins appeared to move at exactly the same moment, like mirrors reflecting each other. When one sister raised her hand, the other raised hers too. When one lowered her head, the other did the same. And sometimes their movements became so perfectly synchronized that people found it disturbing. Witnesses later described it as something unnatural, as if the twins were not copying each other at all, but moving with a single shared will. The stories surrounding their synchronization became even stranger over time. People claimed they lifted their forks at the same speed while eating, chewed the same number of times, even used the bathroom at nearly identical moments. It no longer felt like coincidence. It felt as if the two girls were connected by some invisible signal. People began asking uncomfortable questions. Was this simply an extraordinary bond between twins? Or had they spent so much time staring into each other that they had become trapped there? The sisters started writing stories, creating characters, building imaginary worlds. Inside their bedroom, those worlds felt more vivid than reality itself. There, they were writers. They were protagonists. They were finally people who could speak. But outside that room, they remained silent. Doctors tried to understand them. Specialists observed them. Therapists asked questions. But the twins refused to fully open themselves to the outside world. Instead of connecting with society, they clung harder to each other. The relationship was not warm and comforting anymore. It had become suffocating. They needed each other, but they also felt imprisoned by each other. June reportedly felt controlled by Jennifer. Jennifer felt unable to escape June. They could not survive apart, but together they could barely breathe. The closest person in your life can also become the most terrifying prison. Slowly, the sisters became shadows of one another. Eventually, those shadows began consuming them. As the twins grew older, their world became more dangerous. They no longer stayed hidden inside their room. They started going outside more often. But these were not ordinary teenage experiences. The sisters began committing impulsive acts, theft, vandalism, and eventually arson. But reducing their actions to simple criminal behavior misses something important about this case. June and Jennifer desperately wanted to be heard. They wanted someone to recognize the stories they had written, the worlds they had created, the lives they imagined inside their minds. But reality was cold. Their writing was repeatedly rejected. Their voices never seemed to reach anyone. And when two girls who could barely speak to the world realized that even their writing could not reach it either, something inside them began to break. Their anger came out in destructive ways. Maybe it was frustration, or maybe it was something even sadder. A desperate scream for the world to finally notice them. We are here, we exist too. But eventually, that scream became criminal. Fires were set, property was damaged, and people began to fear the twins. The sisters were eventually arrested and forced into the legal system. People did not know how to understand them. Silent twins, completely dependent on each other. Girls who wrote stories in secret, and then suddenly committed acts of arson. What had turned them into this? Were they dangerous? Or were they simply two isolated girls who no longer knew how to make the world hear them? Even during their trial, the twins confused people. At times, they looked like young criminals. At other moments, they looked like deeply damaged patients in need of help. Eventually, the court decided they should not receive ordinary punishment. Instead, they were sent for psychiatric treatment. That decision changed the rest of their lives. The place they were sent to was not an ordinary hospital. It was Broadmoor Hospital, one of the most infamous psychiatric institutions in Britain, a place where high-risk psychiatric patients were confined. June and Jennifer would spend years there. What was expected to be temporary would ultimately last for nearly 11 years. Broadmoor Hospital. For the twins, the name itself became another kind of prison. There were locked doors, constant surveillance, medication, diagnosis, and isolation. This was not a normal hospital. It was a place where people considered dangerous were separated from society. A place filled with individuals who had lost their freedom for years. Even inside Broadmoor, the twins remained silent. They still leaned entirely toward each other. Doctors tried separating them. Some believed that if they were forced apart, they might finally begin speaking independently. But the results were unsettling. When separated, the sisters became deeply distressed. And when reunited, they clung to each other even more intensely. Nothing seemed to work. Over time, Broadmoor felt less like treatment and more like psychological suffocation. Records from that period suggest the twins were given extremely strong psychiatric medication. After taking the drugs, they reportedly spent entire days in a dazed condition. These were girls who wanted to write, girls who survived through imagination. But the medication seemed to blur even the final world they still had left. And slowly, the twins drifted further away from reality. June would later say that the medication left them unable to think clearly enough to write. Perhaps the drugs were intended to help them, but to the twins, it may have felt like another form of forced silence. Years later, June admitted they had been locked away for far too long. If they had been ordinary teenage offenders, their punishment may have lasted only a few years. But the twins did not explain themselves, did not cooperate, did not speak, and because nobody fully understood them, they remained trapped there much longer. Even inside Broadmoor, they continued writing, diaries, stories, private thoughts about one another. But over time, the emotional tone of those writings grew darker. The sisters loved each other and hated each other. They depended on each other and desperately wanted to escape each other. One sister's existence kept the other alive, while also slowly suffocating her. They could survive only together, but together they were destroying each other. And eventually, their conversations began circling around a disturbing idea: death. At first, it sounded like hopelessness. But as time passed, The idea started sounding more like prophecy. During their years inside Broadmoor, June and Jennifer became consumed by a terrifying belief. As long as both of them remained alive, neither of them could ever truly be free. One of them had to disappear so the other could survive. It was an extreme thought, but inside the strange world the twins had built together, that idea slowly hardened into something that felt unavoidable. One of us has to die, so the other one can live. At first, it may have sounded like despair, the kind of thing deeply damaged people say when they feel trapped. But over time, the twins began speaking about it as if it were real, as if it were inevitable. They were bound to each other. The world never understood them, and eventually they stopped trusting the world entirely. All they had left was each other. But the person closest to them had also become the heaviest weight in their lives. Jennifer reportedly began saying that she believed she was the one who needed to die. Nobody knows exactly what she meant by that. Was it sacrifice, delusion, psychological exhaustion after years inside Broadmoor? Or had the sisters truly made some private agreement that only they could understand? One person who became unusually close to the twins was journalist Marjorie Wallace. She spent years studying them, speaking with them, trying to understand the strange psychological world they lived inside. Some people believed she became the closest thing the twins ever had to a real friend outside their relationship with each other. And before Jennifer died, she reportedly said something chilling to Marjorie. "Marjorie, I think I have to die. We've decided this." The words did not sound emotional. They sounded calm, almost prepared for what was coming, like someone describing a future that had already been accepted. Nobody forced Jennifer to say those words. Nobody ordered her to die. But somehow, both sisters seemed to believe that one of them had to disappear, and Jennifer appeared to accept that role herself. Then in 1993, something changed. After nearly 11 years inside Broadmoor, the twins were finally approved to move into a lower security facility. For the first time in years, it seemed possible that their lives might finally begin again. The doors that had trapped them for so long were starting to open. But just as freedom came closer, something terrible quietly approached with it. March 1993. June and Jennifer were transferred out of Broadmoor to a treatment facility in Wales. It should have been the beginning of a new chapter. After nearly 11 years of confinement, the sisters were finally moving closer to ordinary life again. But during the journey, something about Jennifer suddenly changed. Witnesses later said she seemed different. Her speech became weak. Her body felt heavy. And according to some accounts, she looked like someone who already knew what was about to happen to her, as if she had already accepted the ending. Jennifer had finally left Broadmoor, but she would never truly reach freedom. When they arrived, Jennifer could not wake up. She was rushed to a hospital, but shortly afterward, she died. She was only 29 years old. The official cause of death was acute myocarditis, a sudden inflammation of the heart. Medical examinations reportedly found no evidence of poison and no evidence of overdose. But people still questioned what happened. Why that exact day? Why the very moment the twins were finally leaving Broadmoor behind? Why did Jennifer die just as freedom seemed possible? And why had she spoken about death beforehand, as if she already knew it was coming? Officially, her death was explained medically. But emotionally, the case never felt finished. Was it illness, coincidence, or the final step in a strange promise that existed only between the sisters? After Jennifer died, people could no longer look at her death as a simple medical event, because too many disturbing words had already been spoken beforehand. One of us has to die. I think I have to die. We decided this. Those sentences stayed attached to Jennifer's death forever. And then something even stranger happened. After Jennifer died, June changed completely. After Jennifer died, June changed. It was as if a locked door inside her had suddenly opened. For years, she had barely spoken to the outside world. But now, she began talking. She spoke to people, made eye contact, answered questions, started living independently. It was as if Jennifer's death had somehow released her. The transformation felt impossible to explain. For years, the twins had existed almost like a closed system, silent together, hidden together, withdrawn from the world together. And then suddenly, once one sister was gone, the other seemed to return to reality. That alone disturbed people deeply, but what disturbed them even more was something June reportedly wrote after Jennifer's death. I am finally free. Jennifer sacrificed her life for me. Those words became one of the most haunting parts of the entire case. What did June really mean? Was it grief, guilt, relief? Or was it proof that the twins truly believed one of them had to die so the other could live? Nobody could say for certain. But one thing was undeniable. June was no longer the same person. After Jennifer's death, she slowly began living a more ordinary life. She no longer remained trapped inside psychiatric confinement. She no longer lived entirely inside silence. But even today, people continue asking the same question. If Jennifer had survived, would June ever have spoken again? Were the twins imprisoning each other psychologically, or had society failed to understand two deeply isolated girls for far too long? Because this story is not simply about strange twins. It is a story about isolation, about bullying, about emotional dependence, about two children who disappeared so deeply into silence that they could no longer find a way back out together. And in the end, only one of them returned. The question is whether that return was truly freedom, or the beginning of a lifetime spent living inside the silence Jennifer left behind. June and Jennifer Gibbons. The world remembers them as the silent twins, two sisters who slowly disappeared from the outside world, not into darkness, but into each other. For years, they lived inside a bond so deep that nobody else could truly enter it. Teachers could not reach them. Doctors could not explain them. Even their own family struggled to understand them. The twins created a private world together, a world built from silence, from imagination, from fear, and perhaps from loneliness. Inside that world, they were never truly alone, but they were never truly free either. People still debate what really happened between the sisters. Were they suffering from severe psychological dependence? Did isolation slowly trap them inside each other? Or were they simply two deeply vulnerable girls, misunderstood by the world around them? Even today, their story continues to disturb people because it forces an uncomfortable question. Can two people become so emotionally connected that they begin losing their individual selves completely? And if that happens, what remains afterward? A bond, a prison, or something far more tragic? The story of the silent twins did not end with Jennifer's death. In many ways, That is where the mystery truly began. And perhaps the most haunting part is this. Nobody ever fully understood what existed between the sisters, except the sisters themselves. If this story left you wondering, the next one is waiting for you. Subscribe and stay with us.